Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Boomer Beat. I am your host, Beverly Mahone. As you know, we are now moving into the holiday season, and for many of us, it is a joyous time. But then there are some of us who are dealing with grief and loss. Personally, I lost both of my parents over the Christmas holiday season, some years apart. But every time the holiday season rolls around in that 2 week period, I am melancholy and I am sad and grieving because of that loss. Today, we're going to talk more about how to cope with grief and loss with a good friend of mine, Gary Jones, who is a therapist, social worker. He does outpatient therapy, licensed in Pennsylvania and Delaware. Hi, Gary. Thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today.
Hi, Beverly. It's a pleasure, as always, to speak with you.
Okay, so you've heard my little bit of a story, and I told you about losing both my parents over the Christmas holiday season, and
Mhm.
how does one cope with loss like that when it's like death?
Well, I mean, to be honest, Bev, I think we have to begin by understanding what grief and loss is. Grief and loss is one of those type of things. It has probably hit all of us in different ways. But generally, what grief and loss is it's those feelings, those emotions that we have that are connected to very important people, very prominent people in our lives. Now, these people can be your parents, it can be your children, it can be grandparents, anyone that means a lot to you. And I think with that being said, those are feelings that become very real. So, understanding grief and loss, you have to begin by understanding that those feelings are going to be with you. One of the things I hate to hear people say, and I know years before I became a therapist, I used to say it too. You just got to get over it. Well, you don't just get over it. There's a time for healing. There's a place for healing. So all of those things have to be recognized. Understanding what it is, how it impacts our life currently, wherever we are and whatever stage of life that we're in.
All right. One of the things that I've heard is that, oh, just give them some time to grieve. Don't bother them. Just let them grieve, and then later on you can come in and see what you can do to help them. Is that the best approach if you're dealing with another family member or a friend who's lost a loved one?
I honestly, the best thing you can do is be there as a support. But being there as a support means that you have to listen to what that person needs at that time. So, Beverly, if you were experiencing some pain, some grief, some loss, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, Beverly, hey, I'm here. What is it that you need me to do? Now, you may be able to verbalize to me what it is that you need. At that time, you may not be able to verbalize it, but my job as a supporter for you is to be there. It's not important that you talk to me at that moment. What's important is that I'm there and that you know that I'm there when you need to talk to me. Because once again, time and grief does not always go together. When we try to put a timetable on grief, that can be complicated. Some people will be able to process something maybe in days, maybe in months. But my guess is, and most of the people that I've worked with that have had grief and loss issues, it's not, there's no timetable. The person has to take time, process that, process the loss, process who they lost, process how they want to move forward as they try to just figure out what happens next. And there's no timetable. It's really up to that person. As supporters, we have to be able to respect that. And we may look a year later and say, "Oh, you're still grieving that person," but we shouldn't say that because if that issue has not been closed, if there's no closure, then we just need to be supporters. That's what we have to do.
So let's talk about the difference between losing someone as a result of death and losing someone as a result of a failed relationship, that results in divorce or you just part ways in a relationship. So there's some grieving there, but I'll share a little bit of my story is that when my first husband and I divorced, I was bitter, angry. And then I went to some sadness because then I thought about, wow, it just didn't work. So share your insights on the differences between the two.
Well, there is really a connection. I think what we have to look at is in terms of situational, they may be different, but the connection is that you are still connected to the grief. Uh, a relationship that ends, we have to consider all the stuff that went into that relationship, all the things that you shared, all the things that were involved in the two of you guys being together. And even if the relationship was not a great relationship or even a good relationship, there's still an emotional component to it. So the reality is that you separate, and yeah, part of your grief might be anger of what happened, but there's still that grief and loss in some way. Now, once again, measuring the grief and the loss is going to be different for everybody. The way that it's going to be for me may not be the same way for you, or how it might have been for him. But in terms of situational, it can be different. But in terms of the actual grieving, yes, because sometimes our grieving can be anger at what happened, anger at what we lost, to be honest, or anger at the amount of time that I spent with you, or he spent with him, and now I'm angry. I mean, okay, I done lost a lot of time doing this. Um, I think the difference is that we don't always associate that with being grief and loss. We don't associate relationships sometimes with being grief and loss, but the reality is that it is. We do associate death because death seems to be, well, I mean, it's permanent, just like the relationship is ended, but death just seems to be one of those, it's gone, that person is gone, and we have lost something that we feel we can't get back or we'll never get back. We're not going to be able there's a difference from not wanting to be with somebody and not being able to be with somebody that you love.
Yeah, you're right. So, how do you deal with children? Children who have lost a loved one. How is that grief handled versus dealing with an adult?
It's definitely more difficult because children oftentimes are not asked how they feel. Um, so a lot of times they don't really know how to put that in context. I remember losing my grandparents, both of my grandparents at an early age. And my grandmother died when she was 10. My grandfather died when I was 13. And both of those were transitional steps for me. But what I remember is at the time, nobody really asked me how I was feeling. So I think with that being said, one, I try to establish a rapport with the child to let them talk to me. And once again, in some ways, it's kind of like how I might do an adult. An adult may not want to talk about it. Um, the child may not want to talk about it. And once again, the child may not know how to. So you give time. We're going to allow that child time and space and the time to realize that this is a safe space for them to talk and to explain. With children, a lot of times you really can't go into one-to-one therapy. A lot of times, I'm not going to say one-to-one therapy with children don't work, but you're asking them to explain and to express something that you and I as adults can more easily explain. So I think with children, a lot of times we have to be able to present an environment that's positive, an environment that's safe, and that might mean not talking about that situation initially in the beginning, or maybe minimally in the beginning, or finding. I try to find a different way to go around the subject. Um, with kids, a lot of times I'm trying to do like play games. A lot of times we might just play games, something, whatever it takes for them to become comfortable talking to me. And then when they feel comfortable talking to me, they will begin to talk. So we have to let children talk. We can't. It is more difficult because once again, just trying to get into their minds, their hearts, their brains, it's more difficult because once again, we're asking them to express sometimes what they really don't know how to express.
Mm. So, can grief lead to some form of mental illness, um, depression? If I mean, where you're so overcome and you just can't snap out of it?
Grief often leads to depression. Once again, depending, and it also depends upon the level of grief. And when I say the level of grief, I mean in terms of the level. Well, I guess more so the level of relationship with that individual that you've lost. Grief and loss and depression and often does run together. In terms of mental illness, see, and I hate to use that term because here's the thing: we can label a person as that's mentally ill. We can label them as being depressed, but the reality is that you and I have been depressed, and the only difference between you and I and them is that they probably ended up with a therapist, or they were in some situation where they might have been having a decompensating episode that led to a psychiatric hospitalization or something, and so now that therapist, that doctor has labeled them as such. Depression is something that can be overcome. It can be managed. I think what we have to be able to do is we have to figure out what the root of the depression is. We have to figure out why we're depressed. If the root of that depression is the loss of that individual that we loved, and sometimes hate it because, remember, we can hate a person and be upset because we might have wanted them to go another way. Or there might have been, we didn't have a chance to maybe say what we wanted to say to them. So now we get angry. But in terms of depression, once you identify, I try to work with people to identify the things that are making them mad, the things that are making them feel that loss and that grief. And now once we figure out how to do that, what I'm going to do then is let's start to work on that. If, for example, if you're grieving the loss of your father, around Christmas time, well, let's talk about the relationship. Let's talk about, what was it that you loved about him? Was there anything that you hated about him? What things what things do you think needed to be changed or you would love to have changed? Why does that make you depressed? And if we can go through, if we can, that's where we're going to start at, because you got to know why you're depressed. If someone diagnoses you with anxiety and don't help you to explain, for example, why you are anxious, if you can't identify why you're anxious, you're going to continue to take medication or whatever. But until you identify what it is, you're going to be there. But when you do identify it, it's a different path altogether.
Gotcha. At what point does a person recognize that they might need therapy? I mean, is it something that you just kind of know, or does a friend say, "Look, you know what? I think you need to talk to somebody because you're like off the deep end." How do you get to that point where you just know you need somebody else to help you?
I think the real question would be not so much how you get to the point, but how do you end up coming to therapy? Let's start there. Because sometimes someone, if you're married to somebody or got a significant other, they may say, look, you're going to go to therapy. We're going to talk about this. Now, they're telling you what you're going to do. If you're a child, your parent or guardian may feel you have an issue. You need to talk about it. Now, the reality is that if the person does not believe that they have an issue or have anything they want to talk about, then what's going to happen is that they are going they may go. They may not have any other choice to go, but they're not going to really benefit from it. So there are some people that realize that yeah, I'm having a problem. I really need to do something about this. But a lot of people come to therapy just because somebody suggested that they go, just because someone said you need to go. What I often find is that once in therapy, some people are resistant. 'Cause I'm just here because my wife said I need to be here. I'm just here because my mama said I need to be here. And I'm tired of her arguing with me and
Right.
all this kind of stuff. At that point, what I try to do is I try to, once again, develop a safe space. Okay, you're here because your mom, but why are you here? While you are here, what would you like to talk about? Right? You say your wife, your husband thinks you need to be here. Okay, I get it. You're here because of them, but while you are here, what can we talk about? And it doesn't have to be about your wife or your husband. It doesn't have to be about your mom or your dad. What are you talking about? We can talk about anything. Is it sports that you want to talk about? Is it politics that you want to talk about? Because once again, the idea of therapy is we're talking about what you want to talk about. It's not about what I want to talk about. It's about what you want to talk about. And in doing so, hopefully you can buy into the fact that maybe you do need to be here. And some people do. Some people after that rapport, that therapeutic alliance is established, some people are like, yeah, I realize I got stuff to talk about. And there's some people that, nah, this ain't for me. I'm just not going to do it. So a lot depends upon the person and why they are there and who made them come. And then sometimes people don't realize that the importance of it. Um, we and I don't want to veer too far off the topic, Beverly, but I mean, being an African American male, growing up in an African American community, mental health is just not something that we talk about a lot. A lot of times there's fears, perceptions of what happens if we go to see a therapist. So a lot of people, in terms of African Americans, are bringing up, and it's not just African Americans, there's other people as well that are bringing that into a therapy session, and if they can't feel comfortable with me, they're not going to say anything. They're going to shut down.
Gotcha. So, we're in this pandemic and we've lost many people. I lost a brother-in-law who had a wife. And I spoke with her recently and she said she's still grieving. She misses him. So that has got to take an unusually higher toll on your emotions because of the fact that once you're diagnosed, if you go into the hospital, you can't be there. There's got to do FaceTime. And then all of a sudden, your last communication may be when you drop them off at the hospital. So, how do you deal with that?
The pandemic has definitely changed the way we think, the way we respond, the way we do things. So, I mean, that's the elephant in the room. That's It's just there. We have to acknowledge it. In terms of how we manage that, there's no easy situation to it. I mean, the reality is that I have a brother myself right now who was medically sick, and right now he's in a nursing home. He is getting better. He's feeling better, but it's been a few months, and the pandemic has slowed things down. And whereas actually it's been longer than that. And before the pandemic, we were able to go and visit him. He lives in North Carolina, so when I would come down, I would go and I would spend time with him. But with the pandemic, we can't go. My mom, um, she has to call him, and she can. I think now I think now she might be able to go, but there's still some restrictions. The point I'm trying to make is that that's a difficult thing to manage and to deal with, because you don't have the normal usual supports. So I try to, I guess my response to people who I know that are in that situation is to, once again, as much as you possibly can contact as much as you possibly can. The phone, FaceTime. It is not ideal. It's not what we want to do. And there is a sense of loss because we can't touch them, we can't feel them. And there's the fear because like you said, you can drop them off at the hospital and that's the last time you see them. But I think that all we can do during this time is to try to utilize the resources that we have, the resources that are allowed, and it's to try as much as possible to stay in contact with that person, daily contact. If you can face to face them, I mean that is something I think that we have to try to do. If you have alliances of people in the hospitals or nursing homes that you know that can check on them, if they work there or something. Um, that those become the things that those have become some of the things that we've had to utilize. And once again, they're not ideal, man. They're not. I mean, uh, but we are limited right now in the resources that we have. So some people, a lot of people, are grieving because we want to be there. We feel like we can't be there.
So, one final question here, Gary. What advice would you give to those of us who have lost, loved ones along around the holiday season or even around a birthday? I saw on Facebook recently that a person I know lost his mother like I
Hmm.
think a day or two after his birthday. So, those things kind of are always going to be on your mind. Every time your birthday comes up now, you remember that you lost your mother. Or
Hmm.
now with Christmas, I know that,
Right.
I mean, because I can't get through 2 weeks. My dad died before Christmas, my mother died after Christmas. So that whole
Hmm.
2 week period is like, whoa. So what advice do you give?
The advice that I give honestly is we have to own our grief. We have to be able to allow ourselves to feel the losses that we feel. So the reality is that holidays are these annual birthmarks that we feel every year. We so sometimes people think that when we lose a person, we only miss them on their birthdays. No, when we miss them on the Thanksgiving days, the Christmas days, we remember the times that we had with them on Thanksgiving. You might have had a mom that just cooked a mean, I mean, just outstanding Thanksgiving dinner, the kind that you eat and then you just ready to lay down afterwards. Okay, you might have had a dad who just loved to decorate the house during Christmas, or he was that dude out there in the backyard smoking a turkey or grilling or something. So the thing is that we come into these days and we remember the losses. We remember but we remember what they did during that time, and it makes us feel even more sadder. So I think the first thing you got to own that you have to be able to. You can't press it down. You can't push it down. You need to be able to feel it. You need to be able to allow the fact that you remember those moments and they mean something to you. There's nothing wrong with moments that hurt us meaning something to us. Sometimes they might hurt us, but they mean something to us. You can't act and pretend as though they didn't. Um, with that being said, as we own our own grief, I'm going to also say that we have to create something new. My suggestion is create something new, a new thought. Um, is there a way to reframe that memory of them? In other words, do we think of it as, I miss grandmom because grandmom used to make this really mean sweet potato pie? Or can we think about how much we enjoyed that sweet potato pie that grandma
Mm,
made?
right.
Um, so a lot of times we're reframing, we have to rethink how we think about the way. It does not take away the fact that you miss grandma or you miss your mom on that day. What it does do is it looks at it in a different way. So sometimes I like to use the term celebration. We if you want to mourn and that's what you need to do, then that's fine. I'm not going to take that from you, but I think celebrating, celebrating their lives, celebrating what they meant to you. In other words, putting a positive spot, a positive point on what is probably very negative and very hurtful and very sad because you want them to be there. Um, so I think the way that we choose to think about them on their birthdays, on anniversaries, on Thanksgiving, on Christmas, on Easter, it that helps. And again, some people are able to grasp that and some people it might take a little bit longer. But one of my suggestions is once again feeling the way you feel, and then creating a new way to think about whoever you lost, because they're still a part of you. They're still a part of your heart, your mind, and a part of the legacy they left on to you that you're passing on to your kids and grandkids and nieces and nephews. So trying to create something new. The other thing I would also say, Bev, real quick, I don't know how much time I got, but I would also say making sure that we um, establish boundaries in terms of as you're healing, it might be that there might be some things that you might not be able to do at that time, or there might be places that you don't want to go at that time. You may not be up to doing the big Thanksgiving dinner at this point, or the big Christmas dinner. And I think even though other people may be expecting you to do that, as you heal, if that's not what you need to do that year, then you don't do it that year. It's okay to say no, or it's okay to do to alter how you want to do it. Maybe you go and you don't stay as long if it's going to bring back those thoughts and those feelings. The point is that you get to choose what you want to do and how you want to do it. But most importantly, most importantly, own your feelings. Understand this is the way you feel. You have the right to feel that way, and try to create a new way of thinking about them during these times.
I like that. Yes. And I have bought into that theory too. I often think of some of the funny things that my dad used to say and do, and so that does ease the pain. Thank you so much, Gary. All
Mhm.
right. So you do practice in uh, Delaware and in Pennsylvania. So anybody who is watching this or listening, and
Mhm.
they need to get up with you, how can they do that from those areas?
From those areas, I'm licensed in the state. I'm a licensed social worker, LCSW, in the states of Pennsylvania and Delaware. Anyone that wants to get in contact with me, you can either call me at 215-278-9567. I will answer your call. Also, you can reach me through my email, glj socialwork06. It's GLJSOCIAL06 at msn.com. You can reach me through either my email or my phone number. I had a email, but I'm not email. I had a website, but it's in progress. I'm changing some things, so I don't want anybody to look at it and be like, no. Okay, so every now and then you gotta rechange, you gotta
Okay.
redo things. So I'm in the process of redoing that. Also, but what I will say is that for anyone that has any questions for me, I mean, like if you're in Pennsylvania and Delaware, I definitely can do therapy with you and whatever situation that you need. But anyone that needs to call me, I don't care where you're from, please feel free to call me. I mean, I will answer a question any day. Okay, because I think help should not be limited to where we are. All of us are people that we grow from the way we interact with each other. So please, if you're not within the Pennsylvania or Delaware, borders, you can still contact me. If you have a question, if you got an email, please, if there's anything I can do, I will definitely answer. I will take the time to answer any questions.
Awesome. Awesome. And I'm sure that there's probably going to be somebody that's going to take you up on
Please,
that.
please, please, please. And I can also do my best to help you get resources in whatever area, to try to help you locate those resources. If I can't help you, let's see if we can get someone else to help you.
Wonderful. Well, Gary, thank you so much. I really do appreciate this. And I know this is going to help someone who is, going through during this time of the season. I want to say to everyone, I hope you have a joyous holiday season. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Boomer Beat. Until next time, stay empowered along your journey. See ya.
Good news you use for your life. If you wanna get the info that